load balance pizzas. All right, cheers. So yeah, hi, I'm Peter Kelly. I'm the engineering lead in Cork with Nginx. We're just setting up here at the moment. We'll be moving into an office in town soon. So it's the first time we're sponsoring this event, hopefully the first of many. So I said I'd come and give a talk as well. I gave a talk previously a few months ago about Golang at CorkDev.io. So I said I'd talk about something different, something that Nginx, the new product that I'm working on in Nginx, uses already, GraphQL. It took me a while to kind of wrap my head around it after developing RESTful-ish APIs for the best part of a decade. Coming to GraphQL, you kind of have to leave a lot of maybe preconceptions at the door about designing an API. So it's not perfect, it's not a silver bullet. There's pros and cons, go through some of that. It may suit your use case, it may not, but it's a good thing to have in your toolbox anyway. Has anybody used GraphQL or played around with it? A little bit. Has anybody written or worked with a RESTful API? Everybody, pretty much. Has anybody had an argument about what is REST and what's RESTful and what's not RESTful? Yeah, religiously? Yeah. Okay, so this could be interesting. All right, so it's a query language. Okay, so it's not a technology, it's not a product, it's not something you can go and download itself. It's a query language for APIs. It came from Facebook, so you can kind of think of it the way SQL is a language. It's a specification to talk to a database, and database describes the schema for your data. So similarly, GraphQL is a spec that your client speaks to your server in. Your server understands it, and on your server you describe your data via this GraphQL schema. There's a reference server available from Facebook in JavaScript. It's called graph.js, GraphQL.js, and there's ones for pretty much every language out there. And there's also some client tools for GraphQL, but you don't need anything on the client side, technically. So both the client and the server speak GraphQL to each other. It's typically over HTTP, but it doesn't make any, it doesn't force you to use HTTP. It's agnostic about it. So we have GraphQL over WebSockets, so you can put it over any transport that you want. And this kind of is where it gets interesting. There's just one endpoint. Okay, so if you have, in terms of your URL in your browser, just one endpoint. Okay, so you might have your GraphQL endpoint at API GraphQL or /GraphQL or whatever you choose. And every request or every internal endpoint or everything you're exposing is requested over that single endpoint. Typically over post for querying. So this is where the RESTful people get angry. So you post, because you're speaking GraphQL, you have to post data asking. So it's a query language. So you build up your query, you post it to the server, it returns your data. So you mutate or update via post, and you also get via post. You can do it via get, but you end up with everything in the query string. So we'll have a look at that as well in a sec. So this is some of the reasons why you would choose it. And the first two are kind of like marketing from Facebook. But they kind of make sense. I kind of show it in a minute why as well. You know, in a RESTful API, you normally get you know, something like people, and it returns a list of people, and maybe you can get a person from that, and maybe that person has friends, and maybe those friends have friends. But in a RESTful API, your friends might be an array where you have another URL to go get more information about that friend. So you end up making a lot of calls to the server, the client does, to build up what he needs in your UI. So GraphQL kind of takes a different approach to that. So we'll have a look at that in a sec. It's flexible to a degree, so the client can change without the server having to change at all. Okay, so I think that's best shown by an example in a minute as well. For me, when I started having a look at this, before I even joined Nginx, I was kind of getting frustrated with some of the things in REST and just seeing if there's anything else out there. So that's kind of most people's reasons for having a look at GraphQL. Okay, so how do you do it? You build a schema on the server side, which is similar to creating your routes in REST, what you support. You describe the types that are going to be returned, so it's kind of strongly typed. Okay, so you can't ask for something it doesn't support, it'll give an error. And we'll see how that's powerful for the client as well in a minute. You can write, and then you have to write a resolver, right? So you have to tell it how to get the data. But the good thing about this is that it doesn't really care. It doesn't make any assumptions about your data layer. You can work with existing data layers. It can work with existing RESTful APIs, so you can kind of introduce it gradually. The types that it returns as well, it has some primitives built in, like strings and ints, but you can create your own custom objects as well. There's some generators as well for like SQL to GraphQL. So if you want to create a schema based on an existing database, there's generators out there, open source generators that you can use. That's probably the most involved part, is writing a schema, especially for existing data layer. So you're either thinking that, or you're thinking that, so maybe somewhere in between. So I'm just going to go and have a look at some code. I just have to mirror my displays. The resolution right there, is it okay? Or it's probably the best we can get, I'd say, is it? Okay. All right. Okay. So what I have here is just a REST API. And it's very basic. It has 2 endpoints. You can get a list of people, and you can get a specific person. Let's make sure that's running. Okay, so can everybody see that? Is that okay? All right. So so it returns a list of people. There's a guy called Bill. There's a girl called Karen. We have, I won't scroll down. Okay, and there's a guy called Rob. So Karen has a friend, Bill. Bill has a friend, Karen. Rob has no friends. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah. So you kind of see the problem with REST there. If you're ever a truly REST API, normally you do link like this, so you can follow the chain, I guess, along the way. So you'd have to go and make a number of requests to build up a graph of friends, or a graph of resources. So you can kind of see the problem, especially as the nesting continues. So you often see, okay, so I can get that person, but you often see things like this, don't you? Like where, let me zoom in on that bit. People do things like this, don't they? I've definitely done that, like tacked on some horrific hack at the query string. I've done that. Even worse, a new resource. I've done that as well, definitely. So you can kind of see the problem that GraphQL is trying to solve. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll write a GraphQL API, and we'll get it to show maybe where some of the power is solving that problem. So that's the plan anyway. So, okay. Okay. Here you see the code, okay? A bit bigger. Okay. So I'm just using the express and node, and just declaring a new endpoint. And I'm using, I'm not using it yet actually. I'm going to import this guy from Express GraphQL module. So because it's a spec, the implementations are left up to other people to implement, right? There's a spec published. It's a draft RFC for GraphQL published by Facebook. So there's different implementations of that spec. So this is one of them. So this is the GraphQL engine that's going to be on the server side. It's Express GraphQL. Everything's going to sit at /GraphQL. And I'm going to tell it what schema I support, which I haven't written yet. Okay. Things like authentication, it kind of doesn't make any assumptions about authentication or any other middleware either. So you can add middleware here. You can stack it up before it comes to GraphQL. You can pass in a context. So at least then you have a context object that would have something like session or any other user information about it. And your GraphQL could reject that then if you're not authenticated. There's no token or whatever. Okay, so let's see. Okay. So we're just going to import a schema that I haven't written yet. And all it's going to do is something very basic at the start, right? So let's show that in action. Okay, we'll create a new file called schema. And I'm just going to import a bunch of stuff from GraphQL that we need. All right. So that's a GraphQL schema, and it returns a query. So a query is essentially your root. So all your APIs that you're going to support will be built inside this query, which I'll show in a second. And then there's a concept of mutations, which is changing data on your server. Okay, so let's write a pretty simple query. And when I say write, I mean copy and paste. All right, so we won't make it that complex first, right? We'll just say oops, I forgot something. Okay, so it's telling me that I forgot to put a type on my schema. So as I was saying, it's strongly typed. So here we have to give this guy a type. We're just going to call it, it's just returning hello for the first demo, so we're just going to call it a string, GraphQL string. I've got a comma. All right. Okay. Okay, so this is it's kind of self-describing as well, which is neat. So here I'm asking for all the schema that it supports, and I get an object back. It's GraphQL, but I get an object back. It's kind of like JSON, and that tells me what it supports, what the entire API supports. So at the moment, it's one thing called say hello. And in the server, there's a little field here on the GraphQL endpoint called graphical. True, and what this means is that it spins up a UI that you can use to debug and send queries to your server, and it has autocomplete. So I can see here what it supports. So at the moment it supports say hello, and it returns hello, the endpoint we just wrote. Okay, so this is a client on the left and the server is responding on the right. Okay, that's pretty cool. So back to people. So what we'll do is we'll write some code to support people, make it interesting. All right. Okay. All right. So this is returning a person type. All right, it's an object we haven't defined yet. So we need to define that. But essentially what this is doing, it's the same as I say hello. So we're defining an endpoint as something you can query. Here it's just called person. It has a description, that'll be in the documentation when it returns. It takes an argument. So you're going to call this like a function in your query from the client side. You're going to have brackets and you're going to put in your argument. It's going to resolve. So how it resolves it is just going to go to our data store, just like our REST API did, the same data store, and it's going to get a person by ID. But we haven't defined a person type yet, so let's do that now. Again, it's just another GraphQL object type, and you just give it a bunch of fields. Okay, so the interesting one here is friends. How we're going to define friends. So these are pretty self-explanatory. They map to the underlying data store, ID, email. We don't have to do anything for them. Friends we have to resolve somehow. We can resolve it. The data store has a method called getFriends, pass in the person ID. So that works for us, but what type is it going to be? So there's a thing called GraphQL list, and it's just going to be another, it's just going to be person type. So persons have lists of other persons. Okay, forgot a bracket. It's not, no, not for this, no. It is, yeah. It's just mocked up JSON response for this, yeah. So, but it's JSON, so GraphQL has transformed that to GraphQL on the way back. All right. Let's see if that worked. Person. Okay. Autocomplete for an ID, so I can get the first person. Okay. Store is not defined. Okay. All right, so get the first person. It's not very interesting on its own, but this is the power of GraphQL. The client controls what gets returned from the server, not the server. Okay, whereas RESTful API, you get everything. Okay, if you ask for a person API, the server tells you what you're going to get back, and it could be massive. Okay, so here you ask for what you want back. Okay, from the client. Obviously, somebody has to pay for that, so you're still getting it all from your database, but it's just filtered before it gets back to you. Okay, so you're saving on bandwidth. You can get friends. It's going to default to ID. It's kind of the same as REST, ID2. But unlike REST, now we don't have to go and do another API call to look up your friend's email and name. You can actually decide someday on the front end that you want that, and you get that back from the server. The server doesn't have to make any changes. You can get friends of friends and their names, and so on. All the way down. So, oh. It's not done. Okay.
So is that query you're doing on the left, is that pretty much the same as the raw query that gets transferred over the network?
It is. Yeah. It's exactly the same. So I can actually take this guy here, right? Put him into Postman. Yeah, that's the response. You see that there? Yeah. So it's literally exactly what goes on the wire. Yeah. So we can take that further. We can just finish it off by adding a mutation. What's that?
Is that a line type or just text string?
It's you can, I think it supports, this is application JSON content type. Application GraphQL. But I think on the server, I had a body transformer for that. No, I didn't. I think you can support application JSON as well. You just have to put a body parser before you get the request to parse it into GraphQL. All right. So we can add another thing here saying get all people. Get all people. So this is another endpoint we're going to support. The type is a list of people. All right. And there's no arguments, it's just going to get everybody. Okay, get our friends. Okay, so now we have a new endpoint that we support on the server side, and it gets everybody. And again, you can get their full details if you want to, and like before, get friends and their friends, etc. So build up that graph. So something like that. Yeah. And Rob still has no friends either. So the last thing then is mutations. So mutations, it's just another query type. So it doesn't look any different from this point on. It's just a new object type you're creating. But there is a subtle difference, which is why it's kind of interesting. So I'm just going to show you what it looks like here. Mutation. Okay. Okay, so this guy, it's a new object. It's called change it all. He has fields just like the other guy, and he has one endpoint, update count. Okay, so you're going to be able to call update count from the client. So he's very similar to your query. So the only difference is your variable name, but it's where you place it in your schema. So it has a mutation key, and that's where you place your mutate query. And why that's important is the GraphQL spec states that mutations have to be executed serially, so it's guaranteed to be serial, whereas queries aren't. There's nothing stopping you mutating your data with a query. Same way in REST, if you do a get, there's nothing stopping you from changing stuff. But it guarantees, the engine guarantees that if you put in 1 million requests, it's going to execute them serially. It's going to stack them up and execute them. So that's the only difference really between a mutation and a query. So we could just show that running at the end, I think. Okay. Syntax takes a bit getting used to as well. Okay. Yeah, so it's just a variable, but it's mutating it on the server. So you can see that as well. All right.
What happens if one of those updates fails, like one of those mutations fail,
Mm-hmm.
and if you have a large batch of, is it probably you can't do any transaction?
No. Well, the transactions you'd have to do on the data there.
Yeah, but I imagine it executes them sequentially, so.
Yeah. If it gets like multiple requests for the same object, it'll guarantee that they're sequential. So, yeah. I'm not sure how you do transactions at the application level. It's a good question, though. According to like considerations, there are kind of things, maybe downsides. So the schema, you have to get used to the schema.
How close is their schema to something like the JSON schema?
It looks similar. Exactly, yeah, and it has, you can pass arguments into into the named query. So it is slightly different. Yeah.
And we're looking at a JavaScript implementation of the thing. How portable will that chunk of code be if you're moving it into C# or a different implementation?
Okay.
Is it based around? I assume those factory methods. They try and emulate those.
I guess so. There's a C# implementation of GraphQL engine, the server side. So it adheres to the same spec that the JavaScript engine does, that Facebook released.
And probably has the same. So
It would have
when you say it adheres to it, is it the same create GraphQL object? Is it that level that the implementation has to be?
It is, yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Have you used the .NET one?
I've used the Scala one.
Okay.
Yeah, Sangria.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess it's up to them. Like, I don't know if the exact, GraphQL object type, that's up to the implementer. I think the actual function name, there probably will be very similar, but how it actually behaves adheres to the spec exactly. So.
But it means you can prototype your whole API on the client side.
You can.
On your laptop and then hand it off to the middleware people to re-implement. And
You could. Yeah.
fairly trivial.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Caching's a bit funny though, right? If you're using everything over post, you can't cache anything. So you can use get, but all that query, like that JSON-like query that you're building up, that all that goes into the URL as query string. So you have to make sure it's encoded, and you have to pull it back out and deal with that. So caching is kind of an interesting one. It's up to your server side to cache database calls, use a caching layer, or your client side. So some of the reason why there are GraphQL clients is for things like caching. They look after some caching for you and things like that. So you don't have to hand construct those queries either. Readability. So the first thing when I went to the code base that I'm working on, a GraphQL server, I was like, where are all my routes? Like, where's my API? When you go to a new code base, you're like, I don't understand what API I support. What are my resources? So you kind of have to, especially if they're split over multiple files, trying to put it all together in your head. What is my API can be quite difficult. Something that I found. The fact that it's not REST, so everybody has loads of experience with REST frameworks, everything. So the fact that it's not REST is important because you have a lot of investment in that. So I mean, you're asking for what you want in the client, so the bandwidth is smaller, the data load is smaller that you're asking for, so you're going to save on bandwidth, but you're going to have to pay that somewhere. So if you're getting all of this information, it's going to be on your database or caching there, and then you're going to be filtering it on your server side before it comes to the client. So you're going to have to pay for it somewhere. So it's not magic. It's new, so it's still maturing. So it's good. In fairness, it's pretty good. It's Facebook, and there's lots of bindings, lots of libraries for it. The client, yes, a lot of people do use a client, which means now you've got a new library on your client side, you've got a new thing to worry about on your client side to keep up to date and everything. And automation, so how far do you go with your testing of it if you support everything in your API and you just filter on whatever you want? So how far do you take that? So I'm not sure what the answer to that is. Everybody can ask Rob after.
Surprised he hasn't.
Yeah, I told him it's not allowed to ask any questions.
How do you politely respond when the client requests something that either
Doesn't
you can't
exist.
fulfill or would be too expensive to fill practically?
Too expensive, I suppose, is kind of. I don't know if GraphQL does anything about that. I think that would probably be your application itself. But if you said, what is a person ID 1?
Your data source doesn't necessarily have to be on the same machine too. Like you can farm it out to other machines. Like it's just a place where you get data from.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, you could be calling other services over GraphQL or over REST in the background to gather all this information.
Data chain closer to the data.
You could, yeah. So obviously, I don't know, last name doesn't exist. So GraphQL sends you back a 406. I think you can change that. I think you can get pretty specific, but by default it returns a 406 and it gives you a reason why it went wrong.
Right. So,
So-
the name come last there. Would it partially fulfill it?
No.
Okay.
What does the client actually get? Like, is the client really lightweight thing, or is it like an ORM almost, or?
I haven't used a client library
Okay.
for GraphQL.
So you're just writing.
We're just write the raw queries at the moment, yeah. It'd be good to come back like in a few months after using it in anger and show you all the warts and why it went back to REST. That's it. Any other questions? Rob?
Quick question or two. Maybe.
Yeah.
Are there any security implications?
Oh, there's all of the security implications. Like what?
The fact that you can edit the query in the...
That's on the client side, and like it doesn't make any assumptions about authentication, so it's up to you to, like what a lot of people do is they have a REST API for login, and then you set your session, and then you pass your session along in your request to GraphQL, and then your GraphQL, you can have middleware beforehand, and that if it doesn't have a token, it's going to reject it before it even gets there. So it doesn't make any assumptions about it.
It's agnostic to the transport anyway, so
It
it's
is.
nothing to you stopping you having a single REST call that just takes the GraphQL JSON.
Exactly, yeah, and we have it working over WebSockets as well, so yeah, lots of different things.
But if you want to put like specific roles or authorization on specific maybe
Endpoints.
you can't create, yeah, that
You
kind of
could.
thing.
You could, yeah, because I mean, like you're down at this level. Schema. So when you're implementing an endpoint, like person
Yeah.
or all people, you have the context,
Yeah,
you know, like a HTTP context from your framework, like here is Express, that has like all the user context, the user session. So you could like unpack like a JWT token. You could get information out of it and determine if that person is in the right group or team, and then reject the call before you do any business logic. So, but it doesn't. Again, it doesn't make any assumptions about it. Like so. Yeah. So we're hiring a team at Nginx. We're building it. We're building a team in Cork. We're going to be in the city centre soon. So we have an office. It's going to be pretty close to here. Can't say where yet, but we are hiring. So we've got loads of different roles. We have backend engineers, test engineers, DevOps engineers, some support engineers as well coming to Cork. That's the stack at the moment.
All the shiny things.
I know.
How are you finding Node compared to Golang?
I miss Go. Yeah, Node is fast though. It's brilliant for prototyping stuff quickly. Go is very verbose, but I do miss Go. I miss deploying it without needing Go on the server, building it for different target platforms. Yeah, so they had a couple of Go services in Nginx, and a couple of people I'm hiring I've worked with for the last 2 years, and they've been writing Go for the last 2 years, so we're probably going to hopefully write some Go services in Cork, because we have like the idea with this, the roles we're hiring for is you have an autonomous team that can own a service from start to finish, so why not write it in Go if it makes sense. So that's it. And yep, all the swag is outside, t-shirts and loads of laptop stickers, and then there's a developer license for Nginx Plus for everybody here. So it's Nginx, all capitals, plus CorkDev, and I think that's valid for a month or so. All right, cool.